As a child growing up, and of course before I started studying child life, I remember specifically believing that grief had to be in combination with the loss of a human life. For example, when there were two sisters in our elementary school who died tragically in a car accident. And I remember everyone getting together around a tree, and there was a plaque there, and we cried, and we were sad, and we talked about their life. I also remember getting a little bit older into high school, and my mom's very best friend, who also happened to be my brother's best friend's mom, died from breast cancer. And I remember grief being the way that we felt and what we experienced and the sorrow of her loss. Somewhere in my childhood and developing mind, the word grieve and grave, it all just had to be together. But in reflection, I wish that I knew that grief was a really dynamic term that didn't always just have to be associated with the loss of someone. Sometimes grief comes when you have the loss of something that maybe you hadn't even ever had before. We often hear parents talk about grief on this podcast. Sometimes it's about the loss of a child, but sometimes it's about the loss of a limb or the loss of a life that should have been one way and is now going to be another way, or the loss of dreams that you may have had for your child. Well, thanks to people like Jessica Correnti, she's helping children navigate and understand and identify what grief is from a very early age. And while on this episode, we will be talking about grief as it pertains to Jessica's experience of being a bereaved mother, we will also have episodes in which we talk about grief that has nothing to do with the loss of a human life, but has to do with the feelings of loss and all that can come with it. When I was little, I didn't have the words, the vocabulary to put together that what I was experiencing at this loss of something or not having something was actually grief. Grief, which I now know is a very multidimensional, complex feeling that can accompany many difficult things in life. And thanks to Jessica, grief is now a term that kids will be able to identify and feel comforted because they can have words to finally match their feelings and experiences. As Jessica shares with us, she is not only a child life specialist, but she is also a bereaved mother. And this dual identity that she shares together, two things happening at one time, are why she has her life's passion in her work as kids' grief support. You may see her on Instagram, you may go to her website or heard her on other podcasts, but I'm so honored to call her a friend today. My name is Katie Taylor. I'm a certified child life specialist. I'm the host of the Child Life On Call podcast, and I'm so glad that you're here today.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life On Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here.
I am Jessica Correnti. I am a certified child life specialist and have been in the field for, about 16 years now, which seems so wild saying that. I don't know where the time has really gone. And a big piece of my story is not only am I a child life specialist, but I am also a bereaved mother. So that has really played a huge role in how I, show up both professionally and personally. It's really shaped where my passion and my projects and all the things that I have really been dedicated to over the last 7 years or so.
Being just a friend of yours, although we haven't met in person, I feel very, very close to you. Maggie has shaped a lot of who I am as a child life specialist and just learning from you as well. And you're so generous with your feelings and your experiences, and you hold such beautiful space for people who
Oh,
are trying to learn and become better advocates for families. And so I'm just grateful to be your friend and to get to learn from you.
oh, that means a lot. I mean, just like hearing other people say her name is so powerful too, because I think one of the biggest things as a bereaved parent is you have this fear that your child is just going to be forgotten, and having other people say her name even, 7 years out is so, so powerful. I mean, I get messages from my friends sometimes with, pictures of the sky because that's something that is really powerful. It's a big connector for us, and, it's it it feels good to be seen and have her be seen, and I have shared a lot on social media just about my own grief process, and for me it's really healing to do so, to get that out there and to let people know that they're not alone in their grief feelings and experiences as well, because grief is such an isolating experience. Even if you know that there are so many other people out there,
Yeah.
it's such an individual process too, so it can feel really lonely going through the grief
Mhm.
process. So
Mhm.
it's been a really nice way to connect with other grieving families and, feel less alone.
Yeah, you can independently go through it together,
Yeah,
and
yeah, absolutely.
one of the just recently, you and I were chatting about what did you call it? You called it a grief bomb that you
Mhm.
had in your own life where like the physical manifestations of your grieving process showed up unexpectedly.
Yep, the day after Maggie's birthday, I'm like, "This is not a coincidence." I thought I was doing so well with managing all of
That's
my
the way it
feelings.
goes. You're like, "I'm nailing this."
Yeah, yeah, and then I ended up with a migraine that placed me in the emergency room, and I was like, I like, looking back, I'm like, "How could I not see that coming?" But, it wasn't a coincidence. Grief will make its way out one way or another, and, if we don't give it space to come out, it will show up in those physical manifestations, and, I did not listen to my body and give it the time and space and, practice that self-care that I preach so often about. I mean, I know I'm not alone in not being the greatest with practicing what I preach with
Right.
my my friends, my families, my the children that I work with. But yeah, that was a wake-up call. I'm like, "Okay, I need to prioritize, getting outside every day and exercising and saying no to more things." That's a big one. I'm a
Mm.
big yes person, and that's been a big lesson that I've learned, especially in this last year, that I need to really look at what I'm saying yes to and really prioritize what is going to fill my cup and not take away from me and make me end up in the emergency room
I
because I haven't
know.
had the time and space to, process all of these different things that are coming up for me in life and in grief, because that will, continue on. It's not something that we, you know, tick off the box and say we're done with. It carries
Right.
throughout our lifetime.
One of the other things that I love learning from you is how when children experience grief, we often for some reason expect children to just kind of move through their grief and then it's gone. But what you really teach is that at each new age and stage of development, kids have to sometimes completely reprocess and almost
Mhm.
relearn
Yeah.
what happened or what they're experiencing now and pull it back together with what they went through. How do you see that play out in your work?
Oh my gosh. I see this all the time. I was actually just talking about this yesterday in a webinar that I was giving, and I had an example of my own family, and I I have this like documented both in like pictures and videos of my living daughter processing, the death of her sibling took place before she was even born.
Mm.
So, I have this this video of my living daughter at I wanna say, like, right around a fresh 2 years old, and she's holding Maggie's urn, and she just goes, "Oh, hi, Maggie," and giving her little kisses on her urn, and big brother at 5 years old at the time is explaining to her, "That's Maggie's ashes in there in the urn." And then fast forward, like, 6 more months, there's a picture of her on the ground looking at a picture of Maggie in the hospital, and I remember her saying, "Why she die?" Like, very
Yeah.
simple couple words, but she's slowly putting the pieces together and asking questions as she gets older, and then another 6 months goes around, and she has more questions, and she's asking, "Oh, where is she? And who's with her?" And asking questions like, "Does she eat there?" Like, all of these, like,
Hmm.
these questions get more and more complicated as she gets older, and the emotions too get more and more complicated. Just a couple weeks ago, my daughter was kind of sobbing a little bit at bedtime. We explored that a little bit, and she's like, "I just feel like who's with her? I like, she must be so lonely." So we explored that a little bit, and, these are big big feelings, and I think that's one of the myths that people don't think, or people think that young children don't grieve as deeply, and they do, they absolutely do. They
Mhm.
just don't stay there for a long period of time. They're like these
Yeah.
tiny little snippets, like these 1, 2 sentence things that these statements that, like, knock you off your feet, and you're like, "Oh, wow." Like,
Yeah.
you're really thinking and feeling some big stuff. And then the next sentence out of their mind is like, "What are we eating for dinner?" Or
Mhm.
like, "Can you do this super silly thing with me?" And
Yeah.
so I think that's one of the things that, unless you've lived it or seen it over and over again, you don't realize, or you don't, it's just something that would never even cross your mind that a child grieves so deeply.
That's it's so amazing. She's so smart. Kids are so intelligent, and so I imagine a lot of adults are just too scared to ask the question like, "Well, what do they eat?" Just to even start to contemplate what happens after. I
Mhm.
imagine that a lot of parents are scared at the sadness that they would feel when their daughter is holding an urn of their bereaved child.
Mhm.
I'm sure sadness is a part of it, but can you tell us what it's like for you when you see these things play out in your own life?
I mean, for me, it's so bittersweet, and I've heard other bereaved families talking about this as well. It's like you are so proud to see that relationship that goes beyond, the physical time and space. I mean, my children have a relationship with their sibling that they've never really spent time with at all. So seeing that bond and that relationship grow over the years is really, really powerful. So it makes me feel really proud that they have that connection with their sister. And it also is really sad too, because it shouldn't be this way. It's not fair that they have to experience this. And there's always going to be that longing there as well. So it's a mix of a lot of emotions, and I think it ebbs and flows and it changes. Like, sometimes it is a little bit more of the sadness than the, the warmer, happier feelings, and it just ebbs and flows, and it's constantly changing. I think it's one of those things that it doesn't it's not something that's static. It really changes as time goes on, and there might be certain comments that hit you in the gut a little bit
Yeah.
more, and others that are like, "Oh, that's, like, the sweetest thing you've ever said."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wha Do your kids know the word grief? And How do you explain those feelings that come up with either your own kids or the kids that you and families that you work with?
Sure. Yeah, so the word grief, it is big word. It's small word, but it's a big word. It's confusing. I mean, there are probably adults that don't really fully understand the word grief and all that is encompassing with that word. But I'd say my children, my own personal children, I think have a little bit different view of grief and death and dying because I talk about it all the time. They are very involved in um, this space in general because they've done a lot of volunteering activities with me within the grief space. They also have been very involved in the books that I have written. They've been like my
Mhm.
little, early readers to
Yeah.
give me. I mean, you can't get better advice in a children's book than from a child. So,
Yes.
when I wrote the the 3 books in my ABCs of Grief series, as I was writing them, I was reading it out loud, and my kids would hear it over and over and over again, so they would ask me questions about it. So they certainly do know the word grief. Interestingly enough, I when I was getting everything ready for my first book in the ABCs of Grief series, I did these little mini interviews with kids, asked them about 10 different questions, and one of the questions was, "Do you know what grief is?" Every single child, actually all but one, I think there was one, like, 9, 10-year-old that actually could articulate what grief is, but all of the other ones, the youngest child was, I think I had one, like, 3 or 4-year-old that was a sibling of somebody a little bit older, but they were all in, like, the 6 to 9 age range.
Mhm.
None of them could articulate what grief was except for that one child, and these
Mm.
are kids that have all gone through the death of a family member. All of these kids are exposed to what it feels like having someone die, but that one word, they were like, I don't know. I don't know what that means." But then once we explored a little bit more and, once there is a little bit of language given to them, then they could articulate it, and that's one of the reasons why I created the book, The ABCs of Grief, because it is so complicated and nuanced, and there are all these ideas out there about, like, what grief should look like, and
Yeah.
as a society, we tend to have all of these ideas of what it looks like how long should somebody grieve and how
Mhm.
should they grieve? They should grieve in this specific way, and no, that's not how grief works. We can't, like, wrap it up in a pretty little box and be like, "Here's your grief box. This is how you're gonna move through it." That's not how that works. It's gonna be
Right.
totally individualized, and we're all gonna grieve on our own different timeline, and I think one of the beautiful things about the book is it validates so many of these things, like, that everybody is going to experience grief at some point in their life, whether it's, you know, death or non-death types of losses, because there are plenty of those that we all experience on a somewhat regular basis, and some are heavier than others, some are not super heavy, but some things can be that we as adults might see as kinda little things, little losses
Mhm.
are a really big deal for kids. So
Mm.
this book is a way to really open up the conversation and dispel some of these grief myths that are out there and just connect kids and normalize the experience a bit.
It's so interesting as child life specialists, we often try to give words to those feelings. And as you're describing their experience of like saying all of the things except for the word grief, right? Like everything they're saying just points to this word
Yeah.
grief. And we see it so much with families too who are given a diagnosis. It's all of these symptoms and things are happening. You're given the diagnosis and you feel a little bit validated,
Mhm.
right? And a little bit like, oh, aha, there is
Yeah.
something to define what we're experiencing. And so grief has a powerful way of doing that. And because as you know and we know, if that were a term that our kids could start using from a young age,
Yeah.
it would only benefit their future self as they are able to identify, like, I'm grieving this, or
Yeah.
this feels like grief.
Absolutely. And like I think that's something that's so powerful about this because once they have that language, they can validate whatever that experience is and like you said, say, "Oh, yeah, this is something that's important to me that I'm grieving," versus, "I don't know why I feel this way. I
Yeah.
must not be
I shouldn't.
normal. I should"
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's so many different experiences that kids go through that makes them feel not normal and makes them wonder, am I doing this right, or is this what I should be doing, or all of those questions that come up, and something like this can just give them the language and validate what they're going through as a normal experience in life, and helping them learn ways to move through that too.
It I've read your first book, Forever Connected, and so I'm very excited and was part of your Kickstarter, to donate to that so I can get the
Yeah.
book. And one of my favorite tools is reading to kids, and it's the book is important, and we know that. What could probably even be more important is the questions that come up as you're reading with
Hmm.
the child or yourself, what comes up in you, right? Like, the
Yeah.
book is a beautiful tool. Have you seen that play out in those who have read your books?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both the books that I have out there right now are very easy to be utilized alongside therapeutic activities as well as be conversation starters. And both of these books that are out there, Forever Connected and the ABCs of Grief, really are meant to be conversation starters. And they can be read in their entirety in the 32 pages of each of the books. Or they can be broken down into like, this is a little section that I think, is really powerful and would be helpful to look at right now, and then we can just talk about that because conversations with kids related to grief, they often are these little conversations that build over time. And yes, you can absolutely read the whole book and that's great too, but sometimes that's not what is needed in the moment. There might be like in Forever Connected, there are two different pages that specifically talk about, cremation, and maybe a child has a question about that and the parents are wondering, well, I don't really have the words to that. Like, where can I turn to even figure out what words to say that won't be, you know, too scary or adding to misconceptions? So maybe they want to go to the book and read those two pages and have some words given to them and takes that pressure off of it. So these are meant to be, good conversation starter types of books, and I'm really really excited to see the activities that come out of the ABCs of Grief book as well,
Mm,
because you could literally come up with an activity for every single letter of the alphabet that's within the book. So I can't wait to see just all the creative minds and child life specialists being
yeah.
able to create activities from those.
What is the importance of an activity for a child? Because I know a lot of child life specialists, we use it all the time in
Yeah.
our practice. But what does doing an activity with a child allow space for?
I mean, there's a lot of different things that can come from doing a therapeutic activity. I mean, it can allow them the time and space to really go inward for a little bit and think about, what is coming up for them with a certain type of activity. It's allowing them to express their not only their emotions, but their experiences too, and processing them, giving time and space to process those emotions. And perhaps they might even think about things a little bit differently based on what they saw within a book or a story because of what, a certain character did, or, it just gives them that pause sometimes
Yeah.
and gives them the space to go a little bit deeper. And for some kids that's hard and they need a little gentle nudge to go a little bit deeper, especially when you're talking about these heavy topics and
Mm,
emotions that, some people just want to put the wall up and say, "Nope, that's too uncomfortable, not going
right,
there."
right.
But these activities invite kids to do it in a way that is safe and,
Playful
fun and
sometimes. Yeah,
playful. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I think that's like another grief misconception out there with like working with grieving kids. Almost always, when I say what I do as a profession, I get, "Oh god, that's so
I could
sad."
never do that.
Yeah, yeah. And if people had, like, a window into my time, both with one-on-one sessions and the grief groups that I lead, they'd be like, "Wait, what? You guys are laughing, you guys are playing, you guys are" like, the majority of the time is, like, super fun, happy, upbeat, and then there are these, you know, little moments that are like, "Whew, yeah, that was, like, really heavy, that was really powerful," but it's mostly really fun.
Yeah,
And, processing grief, especially for a child, it doesn't have to be this super dark, depressing thing all the time.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that takes kind of the weight off when it's why people wanna come back to grief group, right? If it were just horrible and sad and very
Yeah.
difficult all the time, it would be a hard place to return to.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Um,
amount of giggling and laughter and silliness in the groups
mm,
that I lead, it's just like it's infectious. It's
yeah,
fun and so and it's really powerful for the kids to have that time to come together with other children like them, and it's just like this unspoken bond and connection that they have, like this instant connection. They're like, "Oh, they know what it's like. They're like me."
mm, mm.
So, it's really neat to see that grow and flourish within the kids in the group.
I love that because I get to see that here on the podcast when a parent shares something and another parent goes, "Exactly. Like you took the
Mhm.
words out of my mouth." And we may be having a completely different experience or diagnosis, but some of the feelings are just so consistent throughout the human
Yeah.
experience that it's very, very connective.
Mhm. Absolutely.
One of the questions I've been asking for our 2024 podcast, trying to keep it new, keep it snappy, is kind of the magic wand question. And where with your heart, your background, your business, kids grief support, if you were to have a magic wand to create something, what would it be? And or what would your mission be?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I wish that there was more understanding and education out there about what grief looks like and feels like just in general. There are just so many misconceptions and I think our society still has a lot to learn related to grief and that goes across all different ages, that goes across all different cultures.
Yeah.
It's just there are a lot of ideas out there that are really hurtful to
Mhm.
grievers and causing pain when, perhaps somebody's trying to be helpful and they use these platitudes like, "At least they're not in pain anymore," or
Mm.
like any of the "at least" statements,
Yeah.
really, it's not gonna go off well. But,
Yeah.
I just wish that, we could wave a magic wand and everybody would be more just grief literate and
Right. Oh. Mhm.
understand that, everybody's process is gonna be their own and you're not gonna fix it. You're not gonna take their pain away, but you can sit with them and let them be the guide and the teacher because it really is the griever that is the expert in their own experience.
Mm.
So we shouldn't be sitting there saying this is how you can do it and this is how you move through it. No, let them be the guide and the teacher to help really move through the process and just sit there with them in whatever it is that they are going through with their own grief process and walk alongside them through it.
Oh. Oh, I love that. I was asking the magic wand question yesterday, and so much of this, the dream is just for this further social emotional education
Mhm.
or and awareness for like being kind
Yeah.
and moving to understanding before judgment and
Mhm.
what could actually hurt versus help. And it's like we're not asking for a lot. Like the magic wand question to to people like us is like we're not asking for $1 billion, you know?
Yeah.
We're asking just for a little bit more education.
Mhm.
One of my last questions is while it is not, our kids' responsibility to teach us things, right?
Mhm.
We're their guide, we're their support. I am interested in what being Maggie's mom has taught you about yourself. Maybe something you didn't know before you met Maggie.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I wouldn't be the person that I am today without her. And gosh, I feel like the in some ways, like the world really opened up because of her. I have done a lot more volunteering because of her. That not that I wasn't, wanting to volunteer before, but it has given me purpose. It's the way that I parent her by doing and creating and pouring myself into these projects that I know will have a greater impact on the world and specifically for grieving families. So I think because of her, these different projects have come about that never would have existed beforehand. I know that I would not have written books if it wasn't for her, and
Yeah.
these books are going, globally and impacting families, and I probably wouldn't have started a private practice if it wasn't for
Yeah.
her. And I mean, I think she has taught me to just jump in, make an impact, do things scared. I'm getting very used to doing that, doing
Mhm.
things when I feel like I don't know what in the world I'm doing, but I'll figure it out. And
Yeah.
I didn't, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, right after she died as well. But one step at a time, things
Mhm.
became a little bit more clear, and I was able to move through the motions, and little by little, here I am. So
Mm.
I think there's a lot of different layers from that, but I know that I wouldn't be who I am today without her.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing her with us and
Yeah. Yeah.
all of your amazing insight and skill is just unmatched. I've learned so much from you.
Oh, thank
Where
you.
can other parents or child life professionals or students or healthcare or just people who listen to this podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, so a couple of different places. I am on Instagram as Kids Grief Support, so you can find me there. I'm there pretty regularly. And then my website is kidsgriefsupport.com. Those are probably the two best places to get in touch with me. And you can find my email on both of those places as well. So yeah, so reach out if you want to connect, if you need anything.
Yeah. And your newsletter is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And I know like the hard work that goes into actually crafting a newsletter that you want to be purposeful and not just fill people's
Yeah.
inbox. And you're absolutely doing that.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
what kind of services beyond being able to buy your books and follow you on Instagram do you offer to other people?
So within my private practice, I meet children as well as do parent consultations. So that can be either virtual. I see clients all over, mostly the US, but I have a few international clients as well, which
Wow.
is a wild and beautiful thing. So I'd say most of my clients are actually virtual, but I do have an in-person space I'm in Maryland. So anybody who is close enough to make the commute into Baltimore County, that's where I'm located. So both of those services are available for folks if they want that one-on-one support as well.
Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists. Parents, we've got a starter kit for you. And clinicians, we even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.